Welcome to another episode of Organisation Design in Focus, a LinkedIn Live series from the European Organisation Design Forum. The purpose of this series is to bring together leading practitioners, researchers, to explore ideas, challenges, and opportunities shaping the future of organisation design. Today's topic is designing organisations for continuous change, strategy, structure, and adaptation in motion. I'm delighted to be joined by Julian Chender, founder of 11A Collaborative and a member of the Organisation Design Forum Advisory Board. Julian has extensive experience helping organizations across the private, public, and social impact sectors navigate transformation through organization design, strategy, governance, and leadership. As organizations face increasing uncertainty, technological change, and evolving workforce expectations, many are asking how they can remain adaptive without losing focus on performance. These are some of the themes we'll explore today. Julian, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be here.
Julian, before we dive into today's discussion, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and the type of work you've been doing? What led you into organization design?
Yeah, so I always wanted to help people and graduated from my undergraduate university degree in 2009, which was not the best economy to find an entry-level job and start working. So I thought, oh, I'll go to social work school and be a therapist. And after 6 weeks, realized I was both too young and immature to do anything near that. And found my way into some desk work with the federal government, and did a bit of a search around what it is I want to do. What does helping mean? And I started to get to the idea of helping at scale. So social movements were very interesting, systems were very interesting. And I went to a conference in Halifax, Nova Scotia called the Authentic Leadership in Action Institute. It's no longer happening, but it was really the beginning of what was called Dialogic OD, which wasn't named at that time so fully. When the conference started. And I said to myself, this is what I want to do. And someone said, you can get a master's in organization development. And being in Washington, D.C., American University had a program that was coupled with the National Training Laboratories, where I enrolled after a lot of cajoling from practitioners saying, you need to get the theory, you can't just jump into this. And quickly, midway through my master's program, found a job at the National Institutes of Health, working with Tony Fauci and his team at NIAID on Ebola and Zika readiness and response. So strategy, enterprise strategy, team development, leadership development. And one of my claims to fame there is that I trained with the person who went on to lead Operation Warp Speed in complexity theory and stakeholder management, which was what Operation Warp Speed was all about. And I moved back to New York after 4 years, where I'm from, to be with my wife, and found a job doing workplace strategy. So the combination of culture, technology, and physical space. And I realized we were designing all of these aspects of an organization, but not designing the organization. And I had studied the STAR model for a couple hours in grad school. It was really not much, but I wrote a paper on it and I remembered it. And I found Amy Kates living, less than 2 miles away. And I reached out to her for a cup of coffee. And it was the best conversation my career has ever had. She took a liking to me. I really was interested in what she was doing. She had trained me. And when her firm was acquired by Accenture, hired me into the operating model practice there, where I spent 3.5 years before launching 11A Collaborative, which is org design, operating model strategy for social impact.
Excellent, thank you. And interesting about how these informal connections can lead to these incredible opportunities that you describe. So let's think about strategy and organization design then. Let's start from the top, if you will. How do you see the relationship between strategy and org design? And why do so many organizations struggle to translate strategy into effective organizational structures, ways of working? And if you could give us some examples from your work, particularly within a social impact context, I think our listeners would appreciate that.
Absolutely. So for me, organization design is the process of strategy implementation, very broadly. And I think what happens, especially in the social impact sector, is that people will hire strategic planners or strategy firms in the private sector like McKinsey, and they will do very high growth, high level, big ideas, everything we can fit in, and then say, here's your strategy. And I don't think any executive should know how to turn that into an organization. I think that is the art and science of organization design. So what I see as the first step is any material change in strategy requires a material change in structure, because your structure, if you're doing it right, is aligned to your strategy. So a lot of organizations will have 3 pillars or these initiatives. Well, if you don't organize around them, they're never going to get done. And I think that translation of strategy to structure is the most important step any organization can take. And the example I'll give is working with a foundation that provided after-school tech kind of drop-in centers. And they were to keep people in underserved communities, give them something to do after school, keep them off the streets. Some of them actually were in neighborhoods where people who came to these teen tech centers were shot on the way to going to the tech. Like, they were very dangerous neighborhoods. So these were safe places where you could learn and grow and explore. And they said, we're making an impact, but we want to make a bigger impact. We want to go and actually deliver economic mobility. And I said to them, that's wonderful. We want, tech-reliant economic mobility, careers that they don't need to get a 4-year degree, which is so expensive in the United States. They can get a certification in something tech-related and that they are finding interesting and be a music producer or be whatever they want to be. But it's growing, it's raising the economic level and, all about growth. And I said, great. So the organization that delivered on drop-in tech centers is not going to be the organization that delivers on economic mobility, because it's completely different. Now, there is a through line here. It's not like they made a left turn. They are amplifying their impact. But the organization then needs to amplify also. So we had to do a new organization design that was able to provide for the strategy. So we talked about geography. Well, where are we going to focus our economic mobility efforts? We talked about advocacy, which was something they didn't do before, that we actually need to change laws and we need to change the way people think about this in order to make this work. We need to change the way companies hire if this is going to work. So their bigger vision became a not necessarily larger organization, but a completely reconfigured organization, because they were also working under cost pressure. So the organization didn't grow in cost, but it completely reconfigured to deliver on a new mandate.
Excellent. That sounds like a fascinating organization and really important work. And you've highlighted the need for this organization that you just highlighted. Adaptability sounded like a kind of an important objective. When organizations want to be more adaptive, what aspects of organization design should they focus on beyond restructuring, for example?
Right. Yes. Restructuring should happen only with a new strategy. So this is the thing, which is the strategy is usually over a time period. So the structure needs to be something we can grow into. And that's part of the adaptability. And so there might be reconfigurations, but rarely are you going to say we need to completely throw out the baby with the bathwater. And what I see, though, a lot, especially from my time in the corporate space, is the pendulum swinging from centralization to decentralization. And every 3 to 5 years, you have a new business unit head, you have a new CEO, and they're like, well, it didn't work this way, so we're going to swing the pendulum the other way, and they completely redesign. And it's just, it ends up being an exercise of moving boxes and lines and becomes extraordinarily disruptive. and not actually adaptive because people can't handle that level of change. So when I'm thinking of adaptive org design, I think of all the things that go after a structure. So I think of governance, I think of process design, I think of how we work together, I think of how we govern our strategy. Like, how do we keep staying on top of our strategy and seeing as it relates to the external environment? Like, just writing it once and saying it's going to take us for 3 to 5 years is not actually realistic. So how do you govern the strategy within the big buckets of work that you've redesigned? And then if you need to make small adjustments to structure, that's okay. The thing that I see, though, is that you always have to close the loop on any change. Where people get stuck and where organizations get stuck in adapting is that continuous adaptation, that they are always doing something new and different without closing the loop on the last new and different thing. So what that means is that there's so many, what I would consider like browser tabs open in everyone's head and in everyone's work. And in the 1930s, Kurt Lewin, who founded organization development and is a big influence for me, had a student called Bluma Zygarnik. And she was Russian, and she was studying at the Berlin Institute of Psychology with Lewin. And she came up with the idea that unfinished tasks take up real estate in your brain. And they tested this by going to a cafe. And they would go to cafes every week, he and his PhD students, and they would sit for 6 hours and talk about their papers, and they would order cake and coffee. You know, it's like Berlin in the 20s and 30s, cake and coffee everywhere. And the waiters would keep everyone's checks separate, all in their head. And so they devised an experiment to go to the cafe and order for 6 hours and ask for the check, pay the bill, and then after 10 minutes, ask the waiter to repeat the check. And the waiter was appalled that they even asked. He says, "It's closed, it's over. I don't remember it." It's only when there's something active that it's taking up real estate in his space. He could not, for the life of him, say what he just had calculated for the last 6 hours. He closed the browser tab. And what we do in change is we don't close browser tabs for people. So it keeps them on a state of physical and emotional activation. And when we think about activating an org model, that's not the activation we want.
and closing the browser tab, and that's really interesting, kind of tying back that historical study to this metaphor, this analogy, if you will, of the browser tab. Could you provide some examples? Is it organizational leaders, line managers? What are the processes or mechanisms that help close those browser tabs?
Really being explicit about what the unit of work is. So a lot of times organizations will undertake what they call transformation. And there will be 3 to 7 work streams of transformation going. Well, what each milestone needs to be acknowledged and closed before you go to the next one. And then each work stream needs to be acknowledged and closed before you start another one. And that actually is in the language and the relationships of the organization. And it's what happens is it starts feeling like change is happening to me, not with me, even if I'm engaged, when we're constantly changing. So yes, we need to adapt to the external environment, but there's a difference between big T transformation and what I call tweaks, which is you do your transformation cycle. It might be 6 months, it might be 12 months, but you do that and people have the browser tabs open for that time. But if you never close that cycle of transformation and say, now we're at not stasis, but we're in the growth. We just developed for the growth and now we're going to do the growth. And that will be a different kind of change. They can then move from one transformation to a different kind of transformation. But if you don't close it, if you don't actually have an ending to the transformation, you just keep transforming, they never actually get out of that space of high dysregulation.
And is this a change of language, of rituals, ceremony?
I think all of that. Yes, absolutely. I think there needs, that's when you bring everyone together and say, this is complete. And this is the outcome. And this is now. And now we're going to start something new to build on it. if you don't have that moment, that touch point with your teams and your people, they never close their browser tabs because they've been told to open so many tabs and run these transformations and change the way they use this technology, and now adopt AI, and now this and that and the other thing. And okay, economic crisis, and now we're at war, and to them, nothing ever, it's all there. It's all straight in their face. And so there's just a question of overwhelm and shutdown that happens actually at a certain point. So you can't be adaptable if you're shut down. And I see that a lot in the social impact space, where there's kind of a freeze moment right now with everything that's happening in the United States in the domestic social impact space. The last year was fight Trump, fight for our survival as social impact. And this year is kind of like freeze, like, let's wait and see what happens with the next elections. Let's wait and see what happens with the next thing. And it's like, but we're moving so quickly. So how do you actually, if you freeze, it's because it's overwhelmed. It's because you didn't close the browser tabs.
Excellent. And I think it kind of touches on governance and decision-making. Governance and decision-making are often overlooked, as you've described, when it comes to driving transformation. How can organizations create greater clarity around decision rights, around accountability, while remaining agile? Because as you were talking about the importance of shutting down browser tabs, I was thinking about tensions between more agile and perhaps traditional waterfall project management methods. Could you speak to those issues around clarity, decision rights, accountability? How do we introduce that?
I think that actually goes with structure, to be honest. I think that's an output of structure, because if you think about allocating work and allocating big buckets of work in structure, we're really thinking about allocating power in an organization. And power is the basis of governance and decision rights. But no one knows how to govern or decide because we've never really learned that. Like, we don't practice that as a culture. We don't, like, we have our households, maybe we govern those. We check our finances, and we have a dashboard that we use QuickBooks or Quicken or whatever you're using, and you check your finances and you manage against that. That's a process that takes effort, that takes time, that takes energy. Saying who should decide what based on where power lies in the organization takes guts. It takes guts, but that clarity is what allows you to move fast, and that checking your finances is what allows you to adapt. So I think governance and decision rights are actually the key to adaptability here. And that those practices, and they are practices, and they are muscles that need to be built in an organization. But I think that's really what allows the organization to always be in conversation with its external environment and always be aligning its internal environment to the external.
Excellent. And thinking about the role of leaders, and when I use that term, I think about it within the context of social impact organizations. I'm not thinking about leadership as a position, but as a process. What role do leaders play in enabling organizations to adapt successfully? And what leadership behaviors become most important during these periods of ongoing change that you're describing?
Honestly, I think the more the leaders can explain what they're doing, why they're doing it, the easier it is for people to come along. And I've worked in a lot of transformations, and I find that the leader will make certain assumptions that are implicit to that person and then not explicit to the team or the organization. And so to the extent that the leader can actually crack open their head and show what's happening on the inside, that level of transparency allows people to pick up the change and run with it because they trust it more. When it's not transparent, for no fault, when it's not transparent, there's a complete break of trust. But the transparency is in why I'm doing this now, why I'm thinking about this. And a lot of times that gets couched in stories. We have an internal comms team that's going to tell the story of the transformation. We're going to really make this a journey for our organization. There's nothing wrong with that. But every time you deviate from that, even accidentally, you need to say why. Because you've just hooked people to that. So what I find is the leader's job is transparency more than anything.
And within the context of remote and hybrid working, are there any implications you have for leading change within this context, the importance of stories, communicating, describing the why? Do you have any examples from your own practice you could share with us?
Yes. No one reads the transformation emails. People spend so much time on messaging, and those emails are triaged as, oh, the organization is doing something and I actually have to right now solve this problem. And that's the email I'm going to respond to. Forget about the transformation email and then go, wait, why are we here? Where are we going? So a lot of what I try to do is I believe in with hybrid teams in bringing them together in person. And using that in-person time very discreetly so that it maintains cost control. It's not just, 2 weeks at a resort in Tahiti, although some people say that that's what they want. I have no problem with that, but it's not going to make, I always say, what are you going to accomplish in Tahiti? And that's when that conversation dies. But what happens, I think, is there needs to be time together to process. And this is where I think org design and org development can learn a lot from each other. Org development talks a lot about content and process, that the way we do the work is the result we'll get. The way we come to the work, the way we show up to it, who we include, how we do that, the way we do the work is the result we get, not the content. It's the process that matters. Content is important, but process is primary. Whereas a lot of management consultants and some org designers will think content is primary, that we have to get the design right. And if we get the design right, then people will buy into it and like it because it's right and it makes sense. It's not how the world works. It's new and it's different. They're not going to like it because of that. So you have to think about the process to get to the right design, not just what is the right design. And that's what I think I really do as a both org developer and org designer, is bring together processing and content.
And I know there's some interesting projects you're working on. It'll be interesting to kind of hear about that towards the end of the conversation as well. But feel free to kind of highlight, because I know we were talking earlier before we went live that there's some training that you have, and it kind of sparks my interest around human sustainability. This is one of the key themes that we'll be exploring in September at the European Organisation Design Forum conference. Transformation often creates pressure on employees and leaders. And you talked about the importance of why, but also I'd like you to reflect, and I'm interested in your thoughts about, when we're telling stories related to transformation, to what extent do we touch on the who benefits and how much, particularly thinking about that human sustainability perspective. So in simple terms, how do we find balance in the organization around adaptability and performance, but then thinking about well-being, thinking about employee engagement and some of those long-term organizational health benefits?
Honestly, I don't see them separately. I really don't. I don't see them. And maybe that's the secret to my work. And maybe it's something I haven't actually thought about and need to, but I don't see them as separate. I see them as inextricably linked. That how we do the transformation, how we do business as usual, how we do all of that is the key to employee engagement. Employee engagement is not a pizza party. Employee engagement is meaningful work that is sustainable. So how we design the organization, if in social impact, a lot of times people are understaffed. So one of the exercises I do there for human sustainability is actually have them map an org chart that's role-based, not people-based. A lot of times they'll put the org chart of like, so-and-so reports to so-and-so, and here's their title. And I say, okay, now make it a new org chart that is just all the roles that get played in the organization. And say, is that a 25% role, a 50% role, or a 75% role, or a 100% role? Map the roles of the organization, no names. That's the work. We have to get to the work. What is the work that needs to be done? Now fill in the names. Now calculate how much work, how many roles each person has. Is it 1.25? Is it 1.75? Is it 3.5? And then you understand that when we're designing for roles, not people, but you also understand that the people are not able to do all these roles. So we need to either trim roles or get more people. And so I see the org design as a sustainability mechanism. I see transformation as, when done right, as a way to create sustainability. And I think the idea that there's so much burnout is actually a structure problem. Like, I don't think burnout is a wellness problem. I think it's an organizational structure problem. And that's where I get, sideways looks when I say that. Because there's a whole, but if we just teach them to meditate for 5 minutes, and I haven't had a meditation practice for, since I was 12, but, great, focus, attention, wonderful. And the job is designed to be unsustainable. So until you change that, it's not going to change. Giving them a gym membership, they're never going to have time to go to the gym. So how are we building the organization to be sustainable as an organization? And how are we building the work to be sustainably done? Is the design, is the org design. That's the translation of strategy to impact. I was working with one client who was like, let's take money out of the equation. And I said, but you're running a deficit. And he says, yeah, but I want to dream about what we can accomplish. And I said, your staff is overworked and you have high turnover. This is not a time to dream. This is a time to think about how to be sustainable in the moment. This is about adapting to your current situation, which is a lack of sustainability in a current funding environment that is restricted. And so what do we need to do about that becomes the conversation for design, rather than let's make a big strategy and grow into it. Everyone wants a growth strategy. Everyone wants to be growing. That's what we want to do as humans, is we want to get to the next level. Well, sometimes you have to take a step back. Sometimes you have to retrench. Sometimes you have to really think about what is actually possible and the constraints. And that's what I love about org design, is because it's all driven by constraints. And social impact has 100 times more constraints than corporate, which is why I like it. I mean, I like it because it makes a difference, and I feel like my work is meaningful there. I like it also because it's 10 times harder to design in social impact than it is in corporate, because in corporate, you can throw money at problems. You can't throw money at problems in social impact. You can't even throw people at problems in social impact. They try to, and they burn out. And that is the problem, is that it's a structure issue. Burnout is structural.
Excellent. And it looks like those comments are really resonating with some of the listeners, Julian. And I do appreciate your perspective on human sustainability, and we're kind of removing that putting the responsibility back on structure and leaders, as opposed to employees to say, well, go off and meditate. We're going back to the work. And that is, of course, the focus of today's conversation. Perhaps we're now at the stage of our conversation, we're almost half an hour in. We could start looking at some advice for practitioners, organizational leaders, around this focus on continuous change. There are some comments in the chat function. If you don't mind, if you've got a few minutes to perhaps we'll look at the chat function and see if there's any comments. Let's have a look here. We've got a comment here, just touching on your point. And I'll paraphrase. With regards to burnout becoming increasingly prevalent across organizations, what do you think needs to change in terms of how organizations are designed and redesigned? And what is your view on that? We've got a comment here. In my view, and experience, many organizations and top management often overlook the human element and focus heavily on more traditional performance measures. What is your view on that? And how do you convince top managers that you work with not to overlook the human element?
Yes. So I'm lucky, maybe, in that social impact is a highly relational field that actually prioritizes the human element over to almost to the detriment of the organization sometimes. To the extent that designing is often done around people rather than around roles. And so I think this idea of what are we focusing on is what grows. You know, the what we measure, how we measure success is the work we do. What we define as success is going to pigeonhole us into how we get there. So I think really working with at the beginning of a transformation, really working with the leadership team, the people who are sponsoring the transformation, to think about what success means for this transformation is going to be where that conversation happens. Because if they say success means we can turn around and sell this company, then you say, okay, to what extent does the people play into that? And they might say, actually, we want to cut 50% of staff and sell a shell of a company. Okay, that's not work I'm going to take. But they're clear because they've been asked. So it's about having that conversation. If they say we want a sustainable long-term, like a lot of the organizations I work with are legacy organizations that have run out of ground. Like 80-year-old nonprofits that just can't operate the way they have for 80 years. And when they're thinking about the transformation, they're thinking about how do we bring the people who've been here for 20 years along with us into a new reality, which is extremely difficult because they've been there for, 3 executive directors and, they will just outlast the next change is sometimes the point of view. This is at least was the point of view in government was, you can always outlast an administration until this one. Which people couldn't. So what we really think about is how do you have the conversation up front and contract for what is success? And how do you bring people into that? The question was thinking about traditional performance measures. What are the non-traditional performance measures that we're going to use in this transformation to make sure that we are aligning our goals to the things we measure, to the impact we want to have?
And bringing in that conversation around human sustainability, we've got other comments here. Janet agrees with you with regards to burnout being a structural issue and the importance of role-based versus kind of people-based organizing. But to kind of speak the language of business and the importance of human sustainability, are we talking about balanced scorecard approach that includes a human sustainability element? How do you do that in a nuanced way for people who are perhaps less familiar with talking about human sustainability?
Yeah, I think about not naming it as human sustainability. I think about the sustainable organization where people are going to give you the effort that you need to get the work done. So it all comes back to the work. Like that's the thing for me about organization design that I think is a huge differentiator in how I experience it and practice it, is that it has to come back to the work to be done, the actual function of the organization. And where people fit into that, how they fit into that is the question of human sustainability. But you see, it's the idea of org design is that we think about the people last. If you think about the STAR model, people are the last point on the STAR model. We design the organization and then we think about who sits where and what the roles are and what the talent systems are. Where this comes in though is how do we go about going about the design in a way that engages our people, in a way that sustains their interest, in a way that builds them into the process so that they support what they built. People support what they helped to create. And so where do we go in again, this is the process, not the content, is like, if you just think about human sustainability as a content problem, when you have to measure it and you have to keep an eye on it, it becomes a secondary thought. and will always be secondary to the business transformation. But if you think about how we do the business transformation in a way that's building human sustainability into the process of business transformation, that's solving the problem.
Excellent, excellent. That's very clear. So as we come to the kind of towards the end of our conversation, Julian, and looking ahead, you've provided several insights over the course of our conversation. If we're looking ahead over the next 5 years, what developments do you see as having the biggest impact with regards to organization design, organizational effectiveness? What should we be focusing on? Or any kind of thoughts you would like to share with our listeners today?
Yes. And the easy answer is we need to focus on artificial intelligence and how that changes our whole social structure and our whole social contract. And that's not my answer, actually. I think it's important, but it's not what I'm going to use my answer for. I'm going to say that it's to go back to what I've been saying this whole time, that the way we as practitioners of organization design can stay relevant, can stay differentiated, can stay helpful is by thinking about the process by which this work gets done. Because soon you can feed, an org chart, a strategy, and a couple other things into AI and have them reorganize the organization for you, hand that to a leader, tell them to proclaim it, and so it is. And that's going to be the competition for us as practitioners, is why do I need to do this in any way other than declarative? And that's where we as humans are different from the machines. So in thinking about, again, it's not about the perfect design. It's about how we get to the perfect design. That's really where we become differentiated.
And to get a bit deeper before we kind of close up our conversation, for those who are listening and those who are really this argument around focusing on the content of the work and the process, what are some final thoughts if people are thinking about how they could integrate a technique or perhaps a practice into their work as practitioners, organizational leaders?
I would say the biggest thing to study is how groups work, group dynamics. Because fundamentally what we're organizing are groups. An organization is a group, teams are groups, departments are groups, and group dynamics is one of the things that organization development does wonderfully. And organization design often works at the level of the whole, and organization development sometimes works at the level of the department or the team on those dynamics. If we can marry that, I think we're golden. And I'll be giving that talk next Wednesday at the OrgDev Live conference about the confluence of design and development.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Julian. And if there's anything else we can do to kind of follow you, if you'd like to people how they can follow your work and anything that you may be working on, please feel free to share with us.
Yes. Julian Chender on LinkedIn. Please reach out. I would be happy to have a chat with anyone who's interested. 11A Collaborative has its own page. That's my business, doing social impact org design, and 11acollaborative.com. So that's where I operate.
Thank you, Julian. Really appreciate your time. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for being with us.